Okay, so I made a video about having a high idle on the Jeep and how to correct it. And I initially had that problem, and what I did in that previous video was good and it's solid for a little bit, but I still had an intermittent issue where the engine would idle too high. And I also had other unrelated issues. In my case, it was the oxygen sensor was giving me trouble. Now, I put a new oxygen sensor in. I put an OEM oxygen sensor, so I know it's good. So obviously that's not the problem. So the problem had to be elsewhere. So basically, if despite watching my first video, you still have an intermittent high idle, and you have other seemingly unrelated issues that pop up at the same time, here's the fix, because this finally did it for me and I have not had any problems since. The grounds on this engine are rather sketchy. So first of all, in the main harness that leaves the engine control module, there is, how would you call those? One of those weird wire joints. That's like a heat shrink wire joint. You know, it's not soldered, it's not crimped. So you have three grounds leaving the ECU. You have going into the main ground, which goes back to the engine, and the oxygen sensor ground, which also ties into that same kind of bundle of wires. Again, it's not crimped, it's not soldered. So from it seems that's just how it was done from the factory. So cut that off and replace it with a crimp joint. I don't think you'd be able to solder it. It's too thick of a wire, but basically get yourself some 8-gauge butt connectors, or 10 gauge if you can't find any 8 gauge. You can jam it in there if you have a 10 gauge, but 8 gauge would be better. So get yourself some 8 gauge butt connectors, crimp them properly with a proper crimp tool. They're not terribly expensive, and you do have to crimp them right so they don't come loose, and you know, then you're completely screwed. And so once you've done that, you also have to clean out, I found, so where the ignition coil is down there, let me try to get some light on there. So that right there is the main engine ground. You see where that wire comes in with a little ring connector? That's the main engine ground. So undo that with a wire brush, clean it up to get all the rust off and all the garbage off. Make sure those are really, really clean, and then that wire branches off and goes straight back to the battery. So also clean out your terminals. Once I did these three things, all my problems went away with the high idle. The engine ran a lot smoother. You know, it would start up, and if it was cold, it would obviously idle a little bit faster, about 1,000 RPM. But then as soon as it warmed up, it dropped down to 750. And then no matter, you know, like what load you put on the power steering or changing gears and all that, it would just stay pegged at 750. So that really was the fix for me. The connection in the main harness, the main engine ground down here, and finally just cleaning up the ground connection on the battery.